Hello and welcome to Read. Today I have a pretty fun, sort of no research required except experience on my part video, and it was inspired. So obviously if you've clicked on the video you've seen the title, so you know what I'm going to be talking about, but I'm going to ask that you indulge my 2-minute tangent story before we begin, which is that when I went earlier in this year to the University of Sydney book fair, or the book hall, and I made a video about that, one of the things that I liked, there was a conversation that I overheard that really stuck in my head. So just to set the stage, at the book fair, it was the first day, lots of people, absolutely bustling. It was like being in Venice in the summertime, and you know, there's different categories of people, of course, or different categories of book hunters. There are the people who are coming because it's, you know, a big event and there's so many books, and they're kind of maybe going to specific tables where they know they're going to get like architecture or art books or whatever, or, you know, textbooks. There are some of the people who are dancing around the fiction area, but they're kind of just pecking. They don't really know what books they're looking for. Maybe they're not big readers. And then you have the savages or the barbarians like me, who come with 3 Coles bags and leave with basically carrying out 3 dozen books. And so what happened was that when I was there, I was probably 1.5 bags full. I'm sort of just lumbering around. I'm doing my probably 15th circle of the fiction table, trying to manifest an Arno Schmidt or a William Gass book. But what I overhear is that I overhear a young woman walk up to a man, an older man, seemingly unsolicited. The older man, similar to me, he had probably like a cradle of books in his hands, and she walked up to him and had like a little beginning, like, oh wow, that's a lot of books, blah 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 blah. But then just the kind of standout question, which stuck in my head, was she just said to him, "How do you choose what books to read?" And he, I think like me in that situation, was a little bit, didn't really know how to answer it, because when someone asks you, hey, how do you choose what books to read? That question is so, like, being a reader now, having experienced, like, maybe I can rationally remember that there was a period of my life where I was in that state where I just thought, hey, I don't even know what books to read. But now I have hundreds of books on my bookshelf that I know I want to read, and that I know I'll be continuing to read throughout the remainder of my life. And I just thought it was a good idea, and it was really kind of a nice little bit of bravery to walk up to someone and just have no fear and just say, hey, how do you choose what books to read? And so what I wanted to do was, I wanted to force myself to be able to give a good answer to that when, if or when that ever comes up for me. And weirdly enough, it did come up, which I'll talk about. But yeah, I just thought, hey, why don't I actually try and sit down and craft a good response to how do you choose what books to read for somebody who is not yet in a position where they have, you know, a career's worth of back catalogue to eventually get through. So there's going to be a couple, I'm going to try and, you know, eventually I'll personalize this video. Maybe I'll just go through some of the books that I read this year, and I'll describe the kind of lineage of what made me eventually buy that book, what gave me that recommendation. And I think that'll be a pretty authentic or a genuine representation of how I chose what books to read. But again, there are some general things where, and I'll maybe reiterate this throughout, but if you are in a position where you don't yet know what to read, it's totally okay. It's completely fine. All I will say is that very soon, if you go through and you persist, very soon the whole thing is going to flip and you are just going to be on the other side of it. So rest easy in that if your goal is to have hundreds and hundreds of books, it's going to be pretty soon. It'll be within like 6 to 12 months of reading that you're going to start having books that you're going to instead want to read, but then need to find time to do it. Anyway, let's get into it. I have some cool ideas, and I've maybe also slightly talked about this in some of my other videos that I've already made on the channel, but I'll just reference them when they come along. I'm not expecting you to have gone and watched the videos. First thing to do, how to find what book to read if you are not sure. Do what she did, ask someone. Just preferably you ask somebody you know, and so this happened recently with me with a friend of mine who I play guitar with. She said, we were just at a gig and she said, I'm looking at getting into reading again. What do you recommend? And of course my brain, I'm like, oh no, do I recommend the recognitions? Because I've talked to her a lot about art and about how to make genuine works of art and how important that book was to me. But I also understand that the recognitions is literally the most bonkers book to ever recommend to somebody as a first book. And then I was just like, okay. But I just said, well, what do you like? What are you interested in? What sort of movies do you like? Do you watch a lot of TV shows? And so she said, yeah, okay, she likes some science fiction. She said she enjoyed watching The Thing with her partner, I think is it John Carpenter film? I haven't seen it, but I thought, okay, cool. I can kind of filter in now. I'm like, do I talk about Dune? Do I talk about Solaris? Blah, blah, blah. And then she said, I think I'm looking at just getting into some nonfiction, especially nonfiction about jazz, because we're both jazz guitarists. And I thought, well, perfect, nice. We've just narrowed down exactly. And I said, if you haven't yet read Notes and Tones by Art Taylor, or Arthur Taylor, I highly recommend that. And I also gave, one other recommendation of an Anthony Braxton book. But so the first thing to do if you are in the position where you are looking for the books is to ask somebody, and ask someone who is a reader if they have some book recommendations. Hopefully they already know you enough as a person where they can give you some recommendations. But if not, if you're on the other side, if you're the prescriber of books, always just ask them what else are they interested in. Try to dig a little bit deeper, find out, do they like science fiction? Do they like fantasy? If someone asked me and they said, I liked Game of Thrones, but I got kind of a little bit bored in like the earlier seasons. I liked a lot of the later seasons, a lot more of the action. Well, I would think, okay, fantasy without so much political intrigue. All right. How about you read The Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson? There's a good balance. It focuses a lot on characters. There's a good balance of world building, and it's generally a pretty light and easy to digest series of books. If they're like, I kind of want something a little bit Harry Potter meets Game of Thronesy. Okay, well, maybe, I could recommend reading The Kingkiller Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss. Maybe they watched Dune and they thought, whoa, I've never really gotten into science fiction. I kind of liked Dune, but to be honest, the second film, I didn't really like a lot of the action stuff. I thought that was a little bit too blockbustery for me. Okay, so then I think, well, I'm going to hone into the science fiction genre, and I'm going to think about sort of technology, but I'm going to try and give a recommendation that's not so, that's maybe a little bit headier or not so much focused on, bombastic fighting and explosions. So I might say, hey, it's a bit of a steep learning curve, I'll just let you know, but there's a really interesting book called Solaris that I recommend if you like science fiction, and maybe if you kind of like alien life and you want to think about that. I might recommend reading Blindside by Peter Watts. The point is that the very first step is, if you are a person who doesn't know what you want to read, just ask someone, and if you are the person being asked, always try to dig a little bit deeper just to give them a more specific or a more catered or more appropriate recommendation. That's step one. Step two, so now we're obliterating the person who's giving the advice. Now our character narrator is the person who is reading, who is getting into and following and pursuing their reading vocation. After you have read the book, and you liked it, go online, look for some YouTube videos on it, see what people are saying about it. And it's totally okay if you So if you liked the book and you see a video review that talks about how bad the book is, don't watch it. Like, don't ignore it. You're not in a position right now where you need to be thinking critically or discriminating that hard with the books that you read. If you liked it and you really liked it, just look for video reviews of people talking about them having also liked it, and enjoy the conversation. Start to enter that dialogue, because as my boy in The Anatomy of Melancholy says, people wouldn't go and travel or vacation if they weren't allowed to talk about it afterwards. And also in the book I'm currently reading, in Walden, Thoreau talks about how it's so natural, it's such a natural impulse to read a book that you liked and to love it, and then to instantly just go and try and find someone to talk about it to. We want to share these works of art. Books, it feels like a solitary experience, but weirdly enough, you watch a meme or you watch a reel, oh my god, it's talking like a boomer, but like you watch a reel online and maybe you haha it and you message it to some friends, but the content is so, like, that's the extent of it. You read a book, you've had this solitary, internal, rich experience, and then you realize, hey, I can go and talk to someone else who also has that rich experience in them. I can go and talk to someone who possesses the world of the Count of Monte Cristo in them, and I don't have that yet. Or I can do the reverse with the Brothers Karamazov or something like that. There's no shame in, or there's nothing, like, one of the great benefits of reading is talking about it afterwards, so that then they can say something and it'll blow your mind because you just missed that, or you just forgot that, or you give an interpretation, or there's a scene that you liked and you highlighted and they didn't know, and so you kind of do the, oh wow, just quickly flick back and read that passage again, or both of you then say, oh yeah, and if you like this, you're gonna love this. So, like, I do really, really want to stress that the table flips really quickly. You will very quickly start to get a lot of book recommendations, even outside of the context of a physical other person, like a book club where you're going to talk to, or a friend. If you go online and you see a YouTube video about it that you like, and the person likes it and they're talking praise of it, one, note what other books they mention in the video, because that's going to be similar, and they're going to say, I'll say, oh, this book reminded me of this and this and this, and I had a similar experience. If, even if there's not that many other things, once you've gotten a vibe for the personality of the creator, what you can then do is go and look at their channel. You don't have to watch the other videos, but if you just see that they've made videos on book number 2, book number 3, or just, like book B, book C, and you can see from the way that they've made the thumbnail, or the way that they've the way that they've made the title, if you can see that they love it, at this point, it can start to be a leap of faith. You're going to start just reading books just because you know that people you like enjoyed them. It's okay if you don't end up liking it. It's actually kind of awesome when you end up not liking it, because you start to realize that there are dimensions in yourself that are shared with the other person, and also dimensions in yourself that are not shared with the other person. And that's a really fun relationship to engage in with an online creator or just with a friend. But the point is that see what other books they like, take a leap of faith, and then if you enjoyed it, repeat. Just repeat. And then, for example, don't just look for one reviewer. If multiple people have talked about it, you then have a new avenue to go in. You have a whole nother environment to see. You have a new range of video thumbnails to look at, but not to actually watch. And that's it. You can then just go on, and you've got at least a decent start of a couple of books that are going to get the ball rolling and continue to read. And so those 4 steps ask someone, go online, see what other books they like, repeat. That is me trying to give the most organic method of getting into reading. From here, I'm going to give some other maybe some more specific or some more engineered ways of finding new books. So once you've started to read a decent catalog of books, you can probably think about them in no book really is in isolation. So of course, when you read literary works, they so often reference other works. And if you read a book like the Brothers Karamazov, and there's a character who is a priest, and they are talking about and they are commenting on certain biblical ideas, at some point, if you want the context of what that character is saying, if you want to be in not just receive the results of an author, but if you want to be in the mind of an author, then you kind of have to go back and read some of the things that they needed to read and try to get the context behind what created this work that you liked. So some things are just going to keep getting referenced. Of course, like I said, there are certain stories in the Bible that you are just going to, at least, you don't need to read the Bible, but you can just at least look up and learn the stories of the Bible so that you have the context. If you read a lot of if you read a lot of books that have a devil-like character or some bargain that is involved, you're probably just going to want to read Faust at some point. And of course, this isn't just for literary stuff. It's probably worth eventually just saying, you know what? Let's just read Lord of the Rings, and just to go back and be like, oh, this is what happens when a person starts a genre, which is crazy. And so the point is that, just another idea to keep in mind is that books do not exist in isolation. There are some books that might seem like they exist in isolation because maybe they're very contemporary, and so they are based in the real world. You don't need to understand how all of these 15th, 16th, 17th century books to understand and read Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, for example. However, it's maybe interesting to consider or to think about the fact that there's some references to Borges going on in Susanna Clarke's Piranesi. And so if you just want to do that transition from I'm just experiencing the product that this author has created to I'm going to try and understand the thought process or the universe that the author lived in that helped them create this work, you can go back and you can look up books that inspired works that you loved. And this happens so much, so intensely, probably to the point that it is overwhelming when you are reading classics, when you're reading literary works. Because, for example, another recommendation I have is to take notes of epigraphs that are used. And I made a video talking about book recommendations via epigraphs. And for example, authors like Borges, who seemed to have read every single book that ever existed, he has a particularly delightful habit of putting epigraphs at the start of a lot of his works. And so, for example, here, this story, The Library of Babel, he starts with an epigraph that is from The Anatomy of Melancholy by Robert Burton. This was the first time I heard of The Anatomy of Melancholy. The name stuck out to me. I just thought, wow, what a cool, seductive name, The Anatomy of Melancholy. And for years, I think I read this book maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and I knew about The Anatomy of Melancholy, and then eventually I got and actually read The Anatomy of Melancholy, which was a beautiful and just amazing experience that I only found out about because of one little one little epigraph, one little quote that Borges included in this. And again, I have a whole other video talking about book recommendations via epigraphs that I recommend going and checking out if you haven't already. But the point is that literary works and literary criticism are going to just bombard you with, oh, you really liked this work? Well, I'm going to let you know that there are 17 different books that you have to have read from history to understand, to fully appreciate and understand the context of this book, to the point where it can be like, dude, slow down. I do not have anywhere near the time to read all of these books. But well, look, welcome to the other side. So here we are now, and here's an example. Earlier this year, I read a very small book called On Being Blue by William Gass. I'd heard about the author, William Gass, because his name was often mentioned around John Barth, William Gaddis, but really the way that I found out about William Gass was that I just watched an interview of him live with Michael Silverblatt, who is my patron saint, and I just really loved his vibe. And so I read On Being Blue. It's this kind of almost, you know how people talk about prose poems? It's almost like an essay poem where he just meditates on different types and different feelings of being blue, and he talks about, he interweaves different literary references in it. Needless to say, I read this little 100-page book. I loved it, and checking out his William H. Gass reader, he has a section called 50 Literary Pillars, where he just says, hey, here's 50 works that shaped the way that I think about literature and that shaped my work, and here's why I loved it. And you can read these and just kind of absolutely enjoy or be seduced by a really, really smart person giving their elevator pitch on why they loved this. So for this reason, I purchased, I have not yet read, I got it for myself just a few months ago, but I purchased Gustave Flaubert's Letters because William Gass wrote, "Here I learned and learned and learned. My letters. I did not learn how to write. You learn that by writing, after you have read much. I learned what and how to think about writing. I learned what literary ideals were and why they were important. I became only a third-grade fanatic, but every advancement helped. I also got to understand something of my own anger by studying Flaubert's rage. I must say I trust hatred more than love. It is frequently constructive, despite the propaganda to the contrary. It is less frequently practiced by hypocrites. It is more clearly understood. It is painfully purchased and therefore often earned, and its objects sometimes even deserve their hoped-for fate. If you love the good, you have to hate the evil. I cannot imagine a love so puerile and thin and weak-kneed, it cannot rage." And what a great introduction. What a great way of just kind of seducing me into saying, oh, hey, you really got to go and read Flaubert's Letters. And then just a added bonus, I mentioned that I'd gotten Flaubert's Letters to my housemate, who is also a reader and also a writer. And he said, oh yeah, his letters are great. His letters are like probably the best thing he ever wrote. Kind of multiple reinforcements. Third reinforcements is I go online and I see some people I follow on Instagram who are also talking about Flaubert's Letters. So it's a no-brainer. All right, now it's time for me to go and read these pretty soon. Building a little bit more on the topic of the theme of read the books that were important to the creators that you like, of course, you can go and find out what books do the bands, the musicians that you enjoy like, what shaped their perspective or what shaped their aesthetics, but then also reading the biographies, reading the letters of authors that you like. So like with reading William Gaddis, of course, I already knew about The Golden Bow, which I read and made a video on, but I didn't realize that I did not even know about the existence of a book called The White Goddess, which was just as, if not more important to the recognitions than The Golden Bow. Instant purchase, haven't yet read it, but definitely going to go in and do so. And you can do that by reading letters, reading biographies, reading autobiographies, watching interviews of authors that you like. And then another thing, maybe one last thing, one last recommendation, just because, and I hope that I've somewhat conveyed how chaotic or frantic it is, because it is really like, oh wow, now I'm swimming in this sea of gloriously unread books. Also, allow yourself to just be seduced by a title. At Swim Two Birds. What the hell is even that? And then, of course, when you read it, it's actually like a kind of English translation of an Irish word or an Irish play. So that kind of makes sense. But I cannot at all deny that the impulse, the first thing that made me actually pick up that book, At Swim Two Birds. What a name. So now that I think I've talked about basically all of the general ways that I recommend getting into reading, I'm going to take a quick scroll through my my books that I've read this year. I'll look for and hunt and try and find some ones that I think the history of it was interesting, and how I found out about it, how I can read more books, or how I found out about it and how I can use it to recommend you find books that you enjoyed. So first up, actually, I don't even need to do a cut or an edit in the video. The first book I read this year was Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy. Made a video on this, and I highly recommend it? I recommend watching that video, actually, just to see what my thoughts are on it. But the point is that reading overviews or surveys like this is a perfect way to just say, oh, okay, I'm interested in this little nook and cranny of a particular topic. Like, philosophy is so absurd, like, that you need to read dozens, if not 100 books to just be up to date and well learned and educated. But surveys like this allow you to just sink into and enjoy and stew in a little particular niche of philosophy, so that after reading this, I realized that, oh, okay, I'm kind of interested. There's something in the Neoplatonists for me that I want to go and eventually read and learn about. So kind of looking at picking up a book by Plotinus. It's okay that my knowledge of philosophy is going to have some severe gaps, because not a philosopher, not interested in doing philosophy. I just want to read things that I enjoy and that spark joy. So I'm allowed, I can afford to have these gaps because it's not my professional vocation. Another interesting thing with learning about philosophy is that I realized I'm really interested in semiotics. And so I got some books by Umberto Eco, but then I realized, oh, I just need to go back and get the first book by Saussure, who more or less invented the concept of semiotics. So that's a way that you can do it. Or that's another way that just reading a book, and it's not hard to imagine why or how I decided to read the history of Western philosophy. I'm interested in philosophy, let's get a history of it. But from that book, I got plenty of other recommendations and plenty of other books that I might want to read. Intimations, 6 essays by Zadie Smith. This book I read, and the reason or the way that I got to it was because I'd already read Zadie Smith and I wanted to read some of her nonfiction. If you have an author that you like, especially an author who is in the kind of literary genre, oftentimes they're pretty smart cookies, and they like writing essays, they like writing nonfiction about things. So a person who wrote a book that I loved, like Zadie Smith writing White Teeth, I generally want to hear what her thoughts are on everyday life, on reflections on what's happening in COVID times. So I picked up 6 essays by Zadie Smith. Complete Stories by Clarice Lispector. How I found out about this book is that I had heard Clarice Lispector's name being circulated more or less on my social media, and what drove me to buy it was actually more of a forced, maybe forcing myself to try to seek out and read more books by female authors, because I like to read classics, and because of the way the history worked out, really unfortunately, most classics that survived were the works that were written by men, so there is a large disparity, almost forcing myself to say, nope, read some more books that are written by women, educate, diversify. Suddenly there's a chance that you come across an author who shoots above and beyond and enters into the ranks of the top 3, irrespective of any gender handicap or anything or any like that. There's no way that I like Clarice Lispector. It's not like she's great for a female author. She blows most other male authors out of the water for me. And so that's actually a way in which deliberately trying to seek out and diversify actually reveals something, or reveals an author, or reveals a creator that just objectively would have been great for you. So that's how and why I read Clarice Lispector. The Way by Swans by Marcel Proust, which unfortunately has gone a ways away, which is a funny story, which I'll tell you another time. But basically the reason why is because Proust emanated this magnificent force in the literary world where everyone, In Search of Lost Times, the best book that's ever been written. In Search of Lost Times, my favorite book. So many YouTubers, people, content creators talk about, and just like, creators in general, artists, Proust is the way to go. If you like sensitivity, if you like kind of beautiful poetic observations of the world, Proust just could not be overstated. And then, another creator, Strange Lucidity, or Maria, she made a video that was essentially, she entitled it something like convincing you to read Proust for X amount of time. And I just thought, screw it, I'm doing it. I'm finally doing it. I'm finally reading Proust, and I read it and made a video on it. So, The Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie. Basically, read it because I was aware of the intense kind of controversy around it. Recently, of course, Salman Rushdie was unfortunately the victim of another attack, and he's kind of written a book about it called Knife. And I just thought, I'd heard about this book for a while. I am the sort of person who's in the category of wanting to not ban books, not, stifle knowledge, allow people to be expressive within an art. So I just thought, okay, well, now's the time, I'm going to read it. I was just aware of the controversy surrounding the book and finally decided that it was time to read it. And that's pretty much it. A lot of the other books on the list, the reason why I read them is simply for similar reasons to the other books that I talked about, or they were just classics so well ingrained or popular in the culture that there's no way that I wouldn't have heard of them, like Frankenstein or The Little Prince, and also there's no way that you wouldn't have heard of them either, or you won't eventually hear of them as a budding reader. And so thank you again for sticking through this quite long video of me talking about how to find books and recommendations for books. I hope you all enjoyed. If there's anything extra you want to add, please let me know down in the comments. Once again, thank you for enjoying this kind of speak easy video, and I'll see you all in the next one.